And we have returned. Welcome back to the stream, everybody. That right there was Leo's paintings from Soul Blazer soundtrack, and that was by Yukihide Takakawa. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but there we are. But yeah, you know, Soul Blazer, because why not? I think I'm overdue for another playthrough of Soul Blazer. It's been, what, 3-4 years, and that is a game that I can just sit down and play at any point. So maybe I'll do that again one day, you know, as if I don't have enough things already on the go without playing a game I've already streamed at least twice. Hello Baked, welcome back to the stream. Hopefully you're having a lovely day. But yes, I have returned, and we are going to dive into some more demos in a moment. But before that, however, I did kind of hint at the fact that I did have a couple of things I could chat about beforehand, I guess. And one of those things is, see, because there's a couple of things, but I also don't have a pile of time, so I'll stick with probably the more depressing of the things to begin with, because why not? Have a bit of a downer on a Sunday. Anyone who follows these things probably already knows, but there has been, I think, 2 or 3 more studio closures, because the video game industry is in the shitter, basically. Overall. And this is more involving Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers seems to really enjoy taking the wrong lesson from all of their setbacks. Well, I mean, there's also the whole thing that happened with BioWare, the crowd that made Dragon Age, but that's a whole other kettle of fish, so I don't really feel like getting into at the moment. But specifically a few days ago, Warner Brothers shut down, I can't remember what the third is, but one of the studios they shut down was Player First, which was the crowd that made that Smash Brothers style brawler Multiverses, which I played a bit of. It was okay. It wasn't anything special, but it was kind of neat. The funny thing about Multiverses is Multiverses ended up really doubling down on the whole live service thing, and that was, weirdly, the lesson that apparently Warner Brothers executives got from the failure of Suicide Squad is like, no, they needed more live service stuff. Never mind that the live service stuff is the reason why people didn't like that game in the first place, but, you know, tell that to somebody who doesn't actually make these things and is just looking at the numbers. So yeah, there's that. But they also shut down Monolith. Now, Monolith is a studio that I've only been vaguely familiar with, because looking back, I've only played a little bit of some of their games, but, and I own a few of them, and there's games that they made I do need to get into. But, the thing about that is Monolith is a studio that existed since, I think, 94? 95? It was about 30 years. We're looking at a 30-year long studio that actually did put out some pretty innovative stuff that ended up just getting canned because reasons, I guess. I don't know. I think I did have, like, up a list of things that Monolith made back in the day. No, back in the day, I say, they were still making stuff. One of the main things is that Monolith was the studio that was making the Wonder Woman game that was announced years ago, and it's, needless to say, that's now been cancelled because the studio doesn't exist anymore. 1994 is when the studio, that's when the studio started. Hello Rolls, welcome back to the stream. Hopefully you're having a lovely day. But yeah, let's see. Monolith made Blood, which is a game that I've seen on Steam because it was remastered a few years ago, and it's, like, wildly popular from what I've seen. Like, it's a very well-received game. So Blood is a Doom-style shooter, I believe. What else did they make? There's a pile of stuff here that they made. They made a game called The Operative for PlayStation 2, and I've heard that was, like, a fairly innovative stealth game. Aliens vs. Predator 2, which was a almost like a multiplayer shooter kind of thing that a lot of people loved. They're the creators of the Fear and Condemned series, which are 2 fairly well-regarded horror series. They also made Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor and Middle-earth: Shadow of War. I think I own both of those games, and this is important because that is they were the developers of something called the Nemesis system. And something that was very well regarded for those two Middle-earth games, those two Lord of the Rings games, is that the Nemesis system was just this wildly innovative thing. The idea being that a lot of the enemies in those games were unique. And because you couldn't, like, permanently be killed because you're some kind of undead spirit kind of thing, I believe you're like this sort of ranger that cannot die, they set it so that whenever one of the orc captains killed you in that game, they actually got stronger. Like, they would rise in ranks, they would subtly change as the game goes on. So you might end up with, like, this really intense rival after a while. And it was this thing that nobody had ever seen before, and sadly nobody had ever seen since, because what happened was that Warner Brothers patented that system and didn't allow anybody else to use it, or even anything remotely like it. So it was only those two games that use that system. The Wonder Woman game that Monolith was making was supposed to also use that, but now that's it. So the studio that made this is gone. It's hard to say if Warner Brothers is ever going to allow anybody else to use it, and they've got a copyright on this system until I think 2036. So that's just gone. Like, they basically took their toys, packed it in a box, and won't let anybody use them. And it's insane. It's crazy that it's, you know, because you see a lot of these situations, especially with these really big publishers, these really big studios, that a game flops, usually due to executive decisions, and rather than take the executives to task for it, like anyone from like middle management up, they just lay off and dismantle entire studios. Because apparently that's the way you fix that problem, right? Get rid of the people who actually make the product you're trying to sell, right? That makes sense. And I don't know, this is something I've been seeing more and more the past few years, and I know I'm not the only one who bitches about this, but it's just, it seems really screwy. Because on the flip side, you look at stuff like, well, Obsidian released Avowed recently. Really neat looking game. That's something I'd really like to get into. I think I've talked about before about how one of the co-vice presidents of Obsidian was like, no, see, what we're going to do is we're going to have a small team. We're going to make not like hugely scoped games. We're going to narrow the focus of the game. We're going to really dig down on the details of that, make sure it's as good as we can possibly make it, and then release that. So it's like, it's not a huge budget game, it's easier for us to make our money back, and then we can make more games. You know? So you've got that, and then you've also got Sega. Because I feel like Sega's been doing better than they ever have, like, the past several years. A large part of it is because of the Yakuza series. But I mean, they're releasing a new Yakuza game, or Like a Dragon game, I suppose, every year or every couple of years. Because they found a way to really streamline their process and reuse assets, but reuse assets in such a way that is slightly more innovative than the previous game. And the important thing is that they keep this one core developer group that slowly learns and accrues experience that they can then, you know, translate into better games. What a concept. You know, not tearing down a studio and then trying to get a bunch of newcomers to figure out how that studio is supposed to operate. What a weird thing, right? You know, people actually gaining experience and getting better at their jobs. Rare's another good example. So, I don't know, there's just... It's just strange that this is the way that things have gone. And part of it is just because of these massively bloated development cycles. And massive teams, and just the prices of the game, like creating the game, skyrocket. And it seems like a common trait, or a common trend, is that you see that these studios kind of flounder trying to figure out what their direction is, because, well, I said I wasn't going to talk about, yeah, very machined and corporatized. That's exactly what it is. Because I said I wasn't going to talk about the whole thing with Dragon Age, but I mean, BioWare has been essentially gutted now. And part of the reason why Veilguard ended up so shaky, this is a game that was only released 4 months ago, is because it changed several times throughout the course of development because the higher-ups kept wanting them to change what the game was about. Like, very specifically, when they started creating Veilguard, The higher-ups at EA wanted it to be multiplayer. You know, we're going to get a studio that's known for single-player experiences to create a multiplayer game, because that's what everybody wants, apparently, or at least that's what, you know, the marketing crowd thought everybody wanted. I think one of the original heads of BioWare resigned shortly after Inquisition, the previous Dragon Age game, was released. And I think he's after strongly hinting that the reason why he left is because they tried to force him to make the next Dragon Age game be multiplayer. Miyamoto killed a lot of the Mario series by altering or redirecting them, like the Paper Mario series. Now, that is one other thing. He had to be in charge of every final save for Mario. Yeah, that is another thing. Nintendo also has its own problems, but there's a funny thing about that, which I'll also get to. Well, hell, I'll talk about it now, because I also recently listened to a podcast about this kind of thing. And, like, so what the basic gist of it is, like, the numbers might not 100% be accurate, but at the very least the ratios kind of are. And, like, the video game industry, the growth of it has stagnated severely over the past couple of years. And specifically the console market has as well. So, I mean, Sony with the PlayStation has kind of flatlined. Like, they're not really making any gains whatsoever. Microsoft with the Xbox has actually gone below average. But strangely, Nintendo is immune to it. Nintendo is just continuously making money. So Nintendo has their own problems, like, you know, you say with Miyamoto kind of like making certain decisions as it goes on. But they're not running into these issues at all. Like, they haven't ran into this problem that these other major studios are, these other major corporations are. So for all their faults, at the very least, they seem to be creating something that is much more sustainable for some reason. Nintendo found a way to cut corners in quality and innovation by cornering the less expensive mobile gaming market. I mean, I guess, but I don't know. I still, despite my problems with Tears of the Kingdom, I'm still amazed they even managed to get that thing to work on the Switch, you know, with all the shit they threw in that. As most of my problems with Tears of the Kingdom, honestly, were with the story, but everything else was perfectly fine. But anyway, so they're still doing relatively well. And the funny thing about that is the fact that, because they did throw out some sales numbers that are fairly accurate, because Nintendo is probably the only company that actually does submit their sales numbers. The other ones don't. So the funny thing to take into consideration for this is that these are first-party Nintendo games, so you can't buy them anywhere else. So you would assume that the logical idea would be that the more platforms a game is on, the more copies you'll sell. In terms of Nintendo stuff, though, apparently Mario Kart 8 Deluxe sold something like 48 million copies. Animal Crossing was 46. I think Breath of the Wild was 32, which is insane numbers for that. But, you know, there's that. Oh, you're curious about what I didn't like about the story? Okay, I think I actually did have a little spiel about this a while ago, shortly after I finished Tears, but I will summarize it, again. But basically the gist of why I didn't particularly like the story, well, I can't say I didn't like the story, it's just that I felt like it was very disjointed. Breath of the Wild felt like it was a lot more focused, but the specific way they structured Tears of the Kingdom, it was like you could figure out and solve certain problems long before you were supposed to, you know? Well, not even before you were supposed to, it's just like 3 or 4 of the main quests were all interconnected and you were kind of learning the same information on all of them. So if you were carrying on with the quest line of trying to figure out where Zelda was, you could find out where Zelda is almost immediately if you get all the memories and stuff, and bam, you learn what happened. but everyone assumes that either she's still missing or that the Zelda you've been seeing around Hyrule is that Zelda. So despite the fact I already knew where the real Zelda was at the time that I did the Fire Temple up in Death Mountain, we were still explicitly chasing who everybody, like Yunobo, the Goron champion, thought was Zelda, despite the fact that I, and I think Impa, knew that it wasn't her. So it's like, and you couldn't really tie these things together until you finished each questline. So other than that. But anyway, back to my point. But yeah, no, it's a funny thing that Nintendo is still doing incredibly well, and they're probably going to carry on doing well. Well, as I've said repeatedly, is like, I have no interest in getting any new system other than probably the next Switch when that comes out. Because it's like, I have less than zero interest in getting an Xbox. And the only reason why I'd get a PS5, as I've said, I'd say probably 100 times now, is to play maybe like Astrobot or Demon Souls, Because those are the only two games I can think of that I can get on that I can't get anywhere else that I'd want to play. Which is not good. It's not a good look. Whereas at the very least, again, for all of Nintendo's faults, I can almost be guaranteed I'm going to get like a stable of games that I know I'm going to like that I can't get anywhere else on a Nintendo system. So, there's that. But the other funny thing about this podcast I was listening to, that they kind of give this sort of rundown of this, they give a rundown of, it was like a 200-page slideshow that a guy did. And again, the numbers aren't 100% accurate, but one thing that they mention is that, and this is the first time I've heard this term, I think the guy who came, God, it was Mark somebody, the name of the guy who did the slideshow. It's the first time I've heard this term, but it is really apt. And what it is he phrased that part of the reason why there aren't very many new games being sold, there's several reasons, but part of it is what he calls black hole games. And what he defines a black hole game as being is like, this is like, for some people, it's their game. Like, they buy this, or in some cases, they don't even need to buy it, and that's all they ever play. So think stuff like Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, Counter-Strike. Stuff that's been going on for years that people are never going to... I mean, Elden Ring can almost kind of count. The Sims is another great example. Elden Ring can kind of count, but that is a game that has a distinct end point, Like, it is a story-based game. I mean, I've been playing a lot of Project Zomboid lately. Well, I don't think it's as excessive as Fortnite in terms of being a black hole game. That is another example. It's a game that technically has no end state. You could be playing that over and over again. You don't need anything else. Overwatch, that's another one, although Blizzard did make a sequel to that apparently didn't really go over very well, but you could even say World of Warcraft kind of counts as that. So people are playing these games, and they don't see any reason to get another. Another one that kind of like is similar to that is not necessarily a game that you get and you could play for years, but series like Call of Duty or Madden or something like that, something that's released on a yearly basis. For some people, that is their game. They just don't buy a game until the next Call of Duty or the next Madden or something comes out. So, there's that. And another thing that they mention too is the fact that there are simply more games released now than there ever were before. Yes, IP selectivity. A way to look at it is back in the day, it was like, what's the word? Console loyalty. Like, you were, like, I was a Sega guy, or I was or I was a Nintendo guy, or something. It's like, you have loyalty to a console, but nowadays it's more like loyalty to a game, or loyalty to a series, and you just follow that wherever it goes, and you don't look at anything else. So there's that. And like I said, the other thing is that there's just way more games being released now than there ever were, and depending, you might not have time to get through them all, and there are so many games that like I said, like Zomboid, don't technically have an end state. You can just keep playing that forever, or you just simply don't have the time anymore. Because I know me personally. Well, let's see. Looking at three large, well, Breath of the Wild, Red Dead Redemption 2, Tears of the Kingdom. It took me, I think, a year and a half to finish Breath of the Wild. It took me 2 years to finish that. It took me almost 2 years to finish Red Dead Redemption 2. And it took me a year and a half. It took me a year and a half to finish Tears of the Kingdom. And I mean, granted, I was streaming both Breath of the Wild and Red Dead Redemption 2, so that took me a bit longer to finish, because I was only playing it when I streamed it, but I wasn't streaming Tears of the Kingdom, and that still took me a year and a half to finish. I know people who finished Tears of the Kingdom in a week. I don't know how the hell they had the time to do it, you know? Oh, you would say there might be a less subtle learning fatigue preventing people from playing new games? That's also true, because, like, if you're going into a brand new thing, you need to grapple with that, you need to wrap your head around it, whereas you can just fall back into a comfort game. Stardew Valley is another good example. That's a game that's been constantly being updated for the last almost 10 years. I think they hit their 9th anniversary recently. So I think, like, some of the numbers, the way they cracked, the way they shook out is like 30% of the people playing video games are just playing the same game that they always have played. These are the people who are playing stuff like Call of Duty and Fortnite and stuff like that. So there's only like a 4% market share for new games. That's it. And you're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of new games a year. Another interesting stat that is accurate is back in 2014, the entirety of 2014, the games that were released on Steam in the entirety of 2014, is equivalent to the entirety of games released on Steam in 1 month in 2024. So yeah, like a year's worth of games basically released in a month. Like, how the hell is anybody supposed to keep up with that? And so, like I said, the podcast I was listening to, if I didn't mention, Triple Click is what it's called. I think at least 2/3 of the people who are on that podcast are games journalists, so they are mildly biased in the fact that they have to keep up with new releases, so they are part of that 4%. But, like, you have to take so many different things into consideration. That, you know, budgetary concerns, because games aren't getting any cheaper. Even indie games can go upwards to like $50 or more now. Some of them are much cheaper, certainly, but still. Time sinks, because I work for a living. Like, I work 40 hours a week. 40? Yes, 40 hours a week. That is the standard. Well, I work Monday to Friday and sometimes Saturday, you know? And then I have all the other shit I need to do as well. And yes, work takes up most of your creative energy. It's like, yeah, sometimes I get home from work and I don't do anything for the rest of the evening because I just don't have the energy to do it. Like, and there are certain video games that take up a lot of headspace that you have to figure out what to do, right? There's not really as many that you can just shut your brain off and do anymore. Just kind of like enter a flow state. So, you know, every time I think about something like this, I'm always like, okay, so I have, you can see a bunch of them in that shelf behind me. That's almost entirely video games. And that's just physical stuff. I've got hundreds of games on Steam. And I don't think I have enough years in me to finish everything I have, you know? So then I get more stuff that might take hundreds of hours. I keep remembering this one thing because Baldur's Gate 3 is a game I'm interested in getting, but I'm also kind of afraid to get it, because I've heard people talk about, because that game's divided up in different acts, right? So I think it goes up to 5 acts, and I heard somebody talk about it, it's like, oh yeah, the second act is one of the best one. You can literally spend hundreds of hours in it. I'm like, of a 5-act game, in Act 2, you can spend over 100 hours in Act 2? I don't have the life to finish that. How can I possibly? And there's people who have finished that game like 5 or 6 times. How? you're starting to get more joy in partially finishing games. You used to feel the need to finish them, but now you're enjoying them for X amount of time, and at all, and it's a fun new experience. Yeah, see, that's the other thing too. I think he used to be with Obsidian. I think he still is, actually. Chris Avallone, I think is his name. He was one of the main creatives behind Fallout New Vegas. His opinion on that is an interesting one that kind of makes sense. Because I think somebody posed to him the question is like, do you think someone's getting their money's worth out of a video game if they don't finish it? And he's like, well, if they played X amount of time of it and they enjoyed it, then it was probably worth their money. And I suppose that's true. I mean, you know. So I don't know. I just feel like it's an interesting, harrowing rabbit hole to get down. But you get just as much, if not more, joy out of rebeating a game. For example, you're working through a bunch of NSO games, Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario Brothers 1. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are certain games you always go back to. There's certain games you always go back to, like, I don't know how many times I've finished Super Castlevania 4, seeing as how I mentioned it earlier, Soul Blazer. I don't know. But it's just something I think about. That they're just, most people simply do not have the amount of life in them to keep up with every new release. Like, I would love to play Avowed, and I might one of these days. I don't know if I have the time for it. One of the things, like, this is a lot of people used as a detractor for Avowed, and I heard it and was like, you know what? That's actually pretty good. And what it is it's not a big open world game like a Bethesda game is. It is divided up into separate zones, and it's not massive, and you can actually finish it in a semi-realistic amount of time. So I don't know. This is just me. I'm starting to lose coherence in my point that I'm trying to make here, but like the general gist of it is I just don't understand. Because a lot of it seems to be trend chasing, you know? Because you get these big corporations like Warner Brothers or EA or Microsoft or whoever, although Microsoft hasn't been too bad for it as far as I've seen, because Microsoft owns Obsidian. But it seems like Microsoft is like, we've bought these studios because we know that they make good stuff, so we're just going to be relatively hands-off and let them make what they want to make, you know? That's what it looks like anyway. More so than some other studios. But like basically the idea that these companies have gotten from games like Fortnite and Roblox is no, we're not making a video game, we're making a space for people to live in and play with each other. And that's all well and good, but they seem to have the idea that every game needs to be that, you know, not like understanding that there's different genres and there's different experiences people want from different games. It's like, no, everything needs to be a big open world thing with drop-in, drop-out multiplayer that you can spend a pile of money on cosmetics and shit for, and that's what every game needs to look like. Every single one. Yeah, it's trying to shift to software as a service rather than a single purchase product. And I mean, they've been kind of trending that way for a while now. But the other way I look at it is like, I don't mind getting a few little extra things. And I don't mind DLC. Like, I mean, I fucking love Undead Nightmare for Red Dead Redemption. That's one of my favorite games, period, and that is DLC. But I think the problem is they're trying to keep people in for as long as they possibly can to the detriment of the base game itself. So if it's a matter of, I guess the best way for me to describe it is that if you're buying a game, I'd like for that game to be a complete thing, you know? And anything else you can buy afterwards in terms of DLC or like in-game stores or whatever, that's extra. You don't need it to enjoy the game. But yeah, you know, it has to be justified. Server costs or cloud storage, etc. The work done by release date should be a fixed price. Exactly. So, like, I don't mind certain types of DLC. Like I said, Undead Nightmare is a good example, but it's more or less, it's not something you need to finish the experience. It's extra to the experience is the best way to describe it. So, like, Red Dead Redemption is a good example because Red Dead Redemption is its own thing. It has a solid story, start to finish. You get through it. You've experienced everything you need to experience for the game. Undead Nightmare just adds like an extra 8 to 10 hours of gameplay that is separate from the main game and also gives you a bunch of extra goodies you can fuck around with in multiplayer. Perfect. Contrast that to Suicide Squad, which ended up becoming a live service game that the story would not actually be finished until they slowly doled out various seasons, whereas like, we're going to give you a new character in a few months, and then you're going to get a little piece of the story in a few months, and so on and so forth. And that ended up shooting them in the foot because they ended up having to end that, like, I want to say 10 seasons early or something, and had to rapidly wrap up the story. Because I've seen the ending of the Suicide Squad game without the extra seasons, and it's nothing. You beat the final boss, which is just a rehash of a boss fight you had earlier in the game, and you find out that he's not even the only one. There's 16 other versions of him that you need to beat, so the story's not over. And that's it. You just need to pay a subscription to get more seasons to finish the rest of the game. I was like, so, yeah. The Red Dead Redemption style DLC? Perfectly fine. Whatever the fuck Suicide Squad did, the fuck was that? You know? And I'm not really blaming Rocksteady for that, the developers, because guaranteed it was something that the studio wanted them. It's something that Warner Brothers wanted them to do. Because they were looking to try to get into that market, and they did it in the stupidest manner possible, you know? I don't know. And what the fuck do I know? I'm just some mook, but that's just my take on all of this bullshittery. And I just needed to get out a little bit of an angry ramble about that. I just don't get it. I really, really don't get it. And that's, yeah, never a fan of segmenting games, buying parts of it to complete the story. Cap for CEO of PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. God, I would run every single one of those companies in the ground. See, going back to Nintendo, for all their faults, at the very least, they're not doing that. Not really. Because, I mean, all of their mainline games, at least, they are like, you buy Tears of the Kingdom, you get Tears of the Kingdom. There was DLC for Breath of the Wild, but you didn't need it to finish the game, you know? It was that kind of thing. Ah, but the golden parachute if you do, yes. It would certainly be interesting me trying to juggle all of these corporations without me actually knowing what the fuck I was doing. Honestly, I'd be no worse than a lot of the people in charge, I'm sure, but at the very least I've got a better idea of what people actually seem to want to play. Basically Kiryu. Oh god, that would... Is there... If there hasn't been a Yakuza sub-story yet where one of the main characters falls ass backwards into running a video game company, it's probably coming. I can almost guarantee. It does seem like the kind of thing that they would poke fun at. You know? I don't know. Ugh. I mean, it happened with real estate for Kiryu. So, he's kind of got some experience in it. I don't know what kind of people he'd have to beat the shit out of to make it work, but Kiryu just gets into a racket with that guy dressed as Crash Bandicoot, you know, the one that did all the commercials for it back in the day. That's exactly what it is, Kiryu versus Crash. And he would have to get Nugget in to help him. Of course he would. Anyway, I feel like there were probably more points I was going to make, but I've been rambling about this for half an hour ago, so I think I'm done. I think that's it. End the stream. Goodbye. No, I'm not actually finished streaming. I should actually get into the demos I was talking about I was going to do.